Hi folks, Dr. Rob Barrington here with some more nutrition advice. I talk a lot in my videos about high quality diets and low quality diets, and so I thought I would just do a video to explain my opinion on what constitutes a high quality diet, and maybe go through some of the foods that are probably detrimental to maintaining your health, and those foods that should be avoided in order to be able to maintain what I would consider a high quality diet. The first thing to mention is that high quality diets are not fixed. Everybody has their own biochemical individuality, and that means that a high quality diet that works for one person may not work for somebody else. So really finding a high quality diet that works for yourself is what you need to do is take the general recommendations and you need to tailor them for your own biochemical needs. Now, some people are perfectly able to do that for themselves. They can go on the internet and they can do their own research, and I would suggest that everybody tries to learn what a high quality diet is and how to make that diet fit their own needs. But if you do find it difficult to understand the complexities of nutrition, I would suggest that you find a good nutritionist and work with them, and they can give you advice on what is helpful and what isn't helpful, and they can also look at the details of your diet and tailor it specifically for your biochemistry. So that's the first thing to say. Very important not to simply copy somebody else's diet and expect it to work. You may need to make adjustments for yourself. If we have a look at a high quality diet, most high quality diets contain all of the macronutrients. That means they contain protein, fat and carbohydrate. There are specialist diets that contain perhaps only protein and fat, such as high fat diets like the Atkins diet. But really, when we're looking at high quality diets, most high quality diets, most traditional diets, they contain all of the macronutrients, but in varying ratios. A diet to be high quality needs to supply a number of things for your health. There are a number of essential elements that are required for human health, and if you miss any of those elements, you will either get a deficiency disease acutely if you have a very low intake, or you may develop a deficiency disease chronically if that intake is a kind of borderline and it just stops you developing a deficiency, but is severe enough to impede your biochemistry. So the essential things that you need in a diet are 2 essential fatty acids. You need 8 to 12 essential amino acids, which come from protein. The discrepancy in the 8 to 12 is based on different research, and certain people require certain amino acids for certain conditions. For example, children need higher levels of certain amino acids because they undergo rapid periods of growth. You also need a source of energy, and the main source of energy would be carbohydrate, and then you need vitamins and minerals. Those are the essential elements that you need for health, and if your diet is missing any of those, if the deficiency is severe, like I say, you will get a deficiency disease. If the deficiency is less severe, you might get what's called an insufficiency, which is many of the people I believe that have chronic health problems that are idiopathic. In other words, they don't appear to have any particular cause. I believe they have borderline levels of one of the essential elements, and that is causing a disruption to their biochemistry, and I think many of the Western diseases fall into that category. If we start with carbohydrate is required in your diet to provide energy, but it's not essential. You can have a perfectly healthy diet without carbohydrate in it. Your body is perfectly able to use fat and protein as a source of energy, but it prefers really generally to use carbohydrate. So when we take carbohydrate, what we really need to do is look at starches, and we need to take them in their whole grain form. When you refine starches, you increase the rate that they are absorbed, and when you increase the rate that they're absorbed, blood sugar problems occur, and you develop insulin resistance, and that causes problems with your insulin system, and this is one of the drivers of obesity, and maybe even one of the contributing factor in cardiovascular disease and cancer. So it's very important to eat carbohydrate sources that are unrefined. When we look at sugars, there's really 2 types of sugar in the diet. There's the natural sugars that we find in foods like fruit, and there are the refined sugars that we find in processed foods. Eating fruit is obviously not detrimental to your health as long as it's done in moderation. If you do eat too much fruit, there is a risk that you could take in too much of the fructose in the fruit, and that would cause just as many problems as if you consumed perhaps refined carbohydrates. But everything in moderation. You shouldn't be having a diet that contains only fruit. Obviously wouldn't be a balanced diet, and I don't think it would be a high quality diet. But there's nothing wrong with consuming fruit because the fructose that's in the fruit is in a form with fibre, and when we eat fibre we tend to negate any of the detrimental effects that fructose has in the body. If we eat refined crystalline fructose, so that's table sugar that contains refined crystalline fructose, or sometimes fructose and high fructose corn syrup is added to things like soft drinks, when we eat that form of fructose it does tend to have detrimental effects on our metabolism, and in particular it can cause insulin resistance. So in terms of sugars, which are obviously carbohydrates, we need to base our intake of sugars on whole unrefined sources. Now there's a pattern building here that I should maybe point out now. High quality diets tend to have unrefined foods. Poor quality, low quality diets tend to have low quality foods that are processed, and they have things removed when they are processed, and that changes the way they interact with our biochemistry. There's an old saying that you should eat things that go off and you should eat them before they go off, and that's kind of true. If you look at the types of foods that you find in a high quality diet, they are the types of food that's the foods that tend to spoil more quickly, and obviously you want to eat them before they spoil. So in terms of carbohydrates, we need to base our carbohydrate intake on whole unrefined grains and unrefined sources of starch, and we also need to take in any sugars that we take in. They need to be in the form of unrefined sugars, and we need to avoid forms of crystalline refined fructose, which includes table sugar. If we look at protein, protein should be of high quality. We need to, I believe, take in a certain amount of red meat. I do believe red meat is a healthy food, but I understand that some people don't want to do that. And if that is the case, then you need to find an alternative that will provide the iron that most people get from their red meat. The same thing is true of protein as it is of carbohydrate. Certain meats are processed and they have things added to them and they have other things taken out, and other meats are what we'd call just slabs of muscle tissue. So for example, a steak is just a slab of muscle tissue from a beef cattle. Processed meats such as hams and things like tinned meats tend to be, for example, they tend to be of lower quality for a start because they're processed, and they tend not to have as high a protein content, but they also processed meats tend to be preserved by adding sodium nitrite and sodium nitrate. Now sodium nitrate and sodium nitrite are converted in the stomach into nitrosamines, and those nitrosamines are able to cause free radical generation, and that leads to oxidative stress, and they are linked to particularly to cancers of the gastrointestinal tract. So a high quality diet should contain, I believe, if it does contain meat, it should be of high quality, and it should be whole unprocessed meat, which is just slabs of muscle tissue. If you are eating processed meats, things like hams, tinned meat like spam, tinned meat like corned beef, you will have a high intake of sodium nitrate and sodium nitrite. Bacon as well has high amounts of these additives, and they have been linked in many studies to the formation of gastrointestinal cancers. In terms of meat, if we eat red meat or if we eat chicken, what we really need to do is we need to eat high quality sources that don't contain drugs and don't contain pesticide residues, and that really means eating organic and free range versions of those meats. I always believe it's better to have smaller portions and be of higher quality so that the cost effectively stays the same, If you cut down on your protein intake by eating of a higher quality, you probably won't do your diet any harm at all, because most people generally overconsume protein anyway. That's perhaps not necessarily true for athletes and those people who perform lots of physical activity, but those people can take a whey protein supplement or some other kind of supplement that supplies protein. Most people generally eat too much red meat, too much meat in general, and I believe that if you want to improve the quality of your meat without increasing the cost, you can simply eat smaller portions of higher quality meat. And of course, when we look at protein, there are other sources of protein such as eggs, and there are two reasons why I would eat free-range organic eggs. Firstly, they are better for you because they won't contain residues of drugs and pesticides, and secondly because the hens that have laid those eggs will have been treated better, and I think that makes a fairer society if we treat our animals with some respect. If we keep buying battery hens, they will keep being produced, and that means chickens will suffer in small cages. And when we look at the wider world, I think it's important that there is this fairness in the way we treat the animals if we are going to eat them. When we turn to fat is a very difficult subject to understand because it's so complex, the chemistry of fat. But to make it simple, really there are two essential fatty acids that are required in the diet, and those are alpha-linolenic acid and linoleic acid, and they belong to the omega-3 and omega-6 family of fatty acids, and you require those in a particular ratio. You need 3 grams of linoleic acid for every 1 gram of alpha-linolenic acid. Now, the problem with the Western diet and low-quality diets is they contain far too much linoleic acid, perhaps as many as 20 grams for every gram of alpha-linolenic acid. And the problem that causes is it increases the inflammation in the body, and that causes the development of many Western lifestyle diseases. And possibly is a contributory factor in diseases such as diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and obesity. So you need your essential fatty acids, and you need to have them in the correct ratio. Now, alpha-linolenic acid can be substituted by taking fish oil of icosapentaenoic acid or docosahexaenoic acid, because they're in the same pathway. They just feed into the pathway further down. So if you don't eat alpha-linolenic acid, you can actually get your essential fatty acids from fish. So that's probably another component of a high quality diet, a source of alpha-linolenic acid or a source of icosapentaenoic or docosahexaenoic acid. The former would come from green leafy vegetables, perhaps nuts and seeds as well. Certain nuts have high levels of alpha-linolenic acid, such as walnuts, and flax seeds have quite high amounts as well. If you want to take in the fish oils, you either need to eat fish oil capsules or preferably whole fish. And if you do eat whole fish, it's better to eat those fish that are further down the food chain, because the ones at the top of the food chain, the big predator fish like tuna, tend to bioaccumulate toxins. So as you can see, this is a bit of a minefield, but most people eat too much omega-6 fatty acids. The take-home message here is you need to increase your omega-3 fatty acid intake to rebalance, redress the pro-inflammatory conditions that most people actually live most of their lives under. Other fatty acids, saturated fat has been ostracized by the mainstream media along with cholesterol for a long time, but really there is no evidence to show that saturated fat or cholesterol have any disease-causing effects, and there are many traditional diets around the world where saturated fat and cholesterol is eaten in high amounts, and they have none of the Western lifestyle diseases that have allegedly been linked to high intakes. Personally, I wouldn't. As with everything, there's a use and abuse. You need to moderate everything, but I don't think eating saturated fat or cholesterol in a moderate, balanced diet is going to have any health effects at all. However, there are another group of fatty acids called the trans fatty acids that are particularly found in processed foods. Margarines, spreads, those kind of foods, as well as anything with those spreads or margarines in them. So we're looking at cakes, pasties, those kind of foods. Trans fatty acids have been linked to the formation of cardiovascular disease and cancer. They are quite dangerous, and interestingly, no safe lower limit of intake has been found. In other words, it doesn't matter how small amount of trans fats you take into your diet, they will have a detrimental effect. There are lower limits of safety that are recommended by organisations like the World Health Organization. But those lower limits are not based really on any science, because the science shows that any amount of trans fats in your diet will upset your metabolism and your biochemistry and will have detrimental effects. So in terms of fats, you need to make sure that you balance your omega-6 and omega-3 fats. You need to get some of your energy from cholesterol and saturated fat, but don't overdo it. And you need to avoid the trans fatty acids. And then there's another group of fatty acids as well that are oxidized fats. Fat is very easily oxidized if it's a polyunsaturated fat, and some of the monounsaturated fats as well with a single bond are also attacked by oxygen. And these polyunsaturated fats that are often found in supermarket oils, so rapeseed oil, sunflower oil, all of the oils that you tend to find in supermarkets, they tend to be oxidized because of the way they're extracted from the original seed. There is really nothing wrong with consuming sunflowers or different seeds that contain these polyunsaturated fats, as long as they are still within their seed coat, because that seed coat protects the oils from oxygen. And there is also vitamin E still within the seed, and that vitamin E protects the fatty acids as well. When you extract those oils and you put them into bottles, what you tend to do is you remove the vitamin E is removed, the protection from light and oxygen is removed, and those oils then undergo oxidation, and those oxidized oils cause oxidative stress in our cells, and they are a form they are a cause of disease. So those are the two fatty acids you should really be eliminating from your diet if you want to call your diet a high quality diet. The oxidized fats, which are generally found in supermarket oils, and the trans fats, which are found in spreads and margarines and any foods containing spreads and margarines. The other thing that we need to be aware of in our diet is vitamins and minerals. Our diet needs to contain enough vitamins and minerals for our metabolic needs. Vitamins and minerals are generally used as cofactors for enzymes. When we have low intakes of vitamins and minerals, our enzymes don't work because they require those cofactors for the proteins in the enzymes to be able to form a specific shape to be able to have their specific function. Low intakes will cause deficiency diseases because metabolic pathways will stop working. If we have borderline intakes, whereby the intake is high enough to prevent a deficiency disease, but it still interferes with the flux through the pathway, we can actually develop insufficiencies, which, like I said, are these chronic idiopathic disorders that generally don't seem to have any kind of cause, and people go through their entire lives often with these types of disorders. The doctor will simply give painkillers or something else to be able to relieve some of the symptoms, but it's never really diagnosed what's wrong with you. Often these people have deficiencies of vitamins and minerals, or maybe even the essential fatty acids. It's very rare to have a deficiency of the essential amino acids, because, like I say, even in most people get enough protein. But the essential fatty acids and the vitamins and minerals are very common deficiencies, and even if you have enough of the essential fats, if you have them in the wrong ratio, if you don't have the 3 grams of linoleic to 1 gram of alpha linolenic acid, that can cause problems as well. But if we go back to the vitamins and minerals, the actual amount of vitamins and minerals that are essential is controversial again. It's very likely that more minerals are essential than we've actually researched up to date. A number of minerals are known to be essential in animals, such as rats, but they're not essential in humans. And that's not because those minerals aren't essential in humans, it's because we can't prove that they're essential. Because you can take a rat, you can give it an ultra-controlled diet missing any of a particular mineral and see what diseases it gets, but that's unethical to do that to humans, and therefore, because some of these minerals are needed in such small amounts, we don't actually know whether they're essential or not. But the chances are, if they're essential in many other animals, that they're essential in humans as well. So the list of minerals that are essential is probably a lot greater than you would read in a book. Can you get all the vitamins and minerals you require from your food? Theoretically you could. Obviously we're here, we have not had vitamin and mineral supplements until recently in our history, and we're all alive. But firstly, that doesn't mean that we were healthy when we were alive. We survived to reproductive age and we were able to reproduce. It doesn't mean that we produced optimal health. And secondly, we ate a food that was very different to the food that we eat now. The food was usually locally grown. The soils were often richer in minerals. It was eaten more quickly. It wasn't stored for so long, and therefore the vitamin and mineral content of the food historically in the past was possibly a lot higher. The food we tend to eat now is grown in foreign countries. It's stored. It's kept in artificial environments to be able to store it for as long as possible. Much of it is processed and the vitamin and mineral content is reduced, but even those foods that aren't processed, they tend to be grown perhaps in soils that are deficient in particular minerals. The minerals that we require for our health are not the same minerals that plants require to grow. So you can grow a nice field of wheat full of healthy grain, and that doesn't mean that that is going to make the people that eat that grain healthy, because the plants don't need the same minerals that we do, and therefore you have to be careful where you're getting your food from. Because it's almost impossible to ascertain what vitamins and minerals are in your food, I would always, as an insurance policy, recommend that anybody takes a good quality, high potency multivitamin and mineral tablet as an insurance policy against there being an absence of the vitamins and minerals in your food. There are a number of other vitamins and minerals I would recommend you take in isolation. Vitamin D is one of them. If you have access to the sun 365 days a year because you live near the equator, you really don't need vitamin D supplements. But anybody that lives at higher latitudes, anybody who experiences a winter, will need to have vitamin D supplements during the winter, because we cannot produce vitamin D in our skin when the sun isn't strong enough, and we can't get enough vitamin D appears from our food. So vitamin D is another vitamin, for example, that needs particular attention in the diet. High quality diets, therefore, if we're going to give an overview, high quality diets are unprocessed. They tend to contain unrefined, unprocessed foods. They tend to avoid metabolic poisons, and the metabolic poisons that I would say are the most common generally in the Western diet are fructose, the trans fats, and oxidized fats as well. If you avoid fructose, trans fats, and oxidized fats, you'll go a long way to improving your health. Another problem with diets is that they tend to be absent of some of the vitamins and minerals, but you can get around that by taking a multivitamin tablet. So really that's an overview of what I would suggest a high quality diet would contain. If we want to have a look at the archetypal high quality diet, I would suggest that if you look at the Mediterranean diet, the traditional Mediterranean diet, that is not far from probably the archetypal diet that would be of most use to most people. That doesn't mean it doesn't need small changes for people's biochemical individuality, and that doesn't mean that you can't alter it in certain ways. But if you want a baseline to start from, to say, okay, I'm going to start from what I think is a general high quality diet, and you're a little bit confused, you don't know where to start, have a look on my blog site. The link to that is always in the comments box below these videos. Have a look at other sites that have talked about the Mediterranean diet. Do a bit of research. There are many research papers that have looked at the content of the traditional Mediterranean diet, which does vary slightly from country to country and region to region. The Mediterranean diet is a general diet, but again, it is adapted for the various populations that live around the Mediterranean. And the Mediterranean diet in North Africa is not quite the same as the Mediterranean diet in Italy, which is not quite the same as the Mediterranean diet, for example, in maybe the south of France. So you do have to look at the diet as a whole, do a bit of research and see what types of foods it contains. But if you do look at the diet, you'll see that the recommendations I've given in this video are not that far away from the recommendations that are now given to follow the Mediterranean diet for those reasons, because that it is considered a high quality diet. And that's not to say there aren't other high quality diets around the world. It's just that the Mediterranean diet has been the most well studied, there's the most information on it, and it does seem to be particularly effective for a number of reasons. So I hope this video was interesting. I hope it was informative and useful. If you have any comments about things that I've left out, or things that I should have mentioned and perhaps you have different opinions on, perhaps you have tried a particular diet, if you want to leave a comment in the comments box below, as always I will try to respond to you as quickly as possible, and I will see you next week hopefully for another video. Take care.